I still remember that moment like it just happened. I was standing by the coffee machine in the break room at Evergreen Solutions, downtown Seattle, adding a splash of oat milk to my morning coffee. The steam rose from the cup, mingling with the low hum of colleagues chatting at a nearby table. A light rain pattered against the glass window, casting a misty veil over Puget Sound in the distance. I'd just checked my emails, making sure everything was set for the final meeting on the Transglobal contract, a $20 million deal I'd sweated over for 8 months to negotiate. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The break room door swung open. Sophie Bennett, the new CEO and the boss's daughter, strode in. Her high heels clicked sharply on the wooden floor, her navy suit tailored to perfection, but her eyes were icy, cutting through me like I was just an irrelevant fixture in the room. She didn't greet, didn't smile, just said, "Ethan, I need to see you in the office now." Her tone wasn't a request, it was a command. I set my coffee down, my heart starting to race, a bad feeling creeping in. I followed her through the short hallway to the glass-walled meeting room, where light from the windows spilled across the long wooden table. Sophie didn't sit. She stood, flipping through a stack of papers on the table, her eyes glued to them as if I didn't exist. "You're fired," she said, her voice flat, emotionless. "We don't need lazy people like you dragging the company down." I blinked, thinking it was some cruel joke. My heart pounded, blood rushed to my head, my ears ringing. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly, despite trying to stay calm. "I've led the Transglobal contract for 8 months, Sophie. That deal's worth $20 million. I built this department from nothing." She shrugged, flipping another page, her eyes still on the documents. "You heard me," she said, her tone as casual as if she were choosing lunch. "Pack your things and leave today, effective immediately." I stood there, staring at Sophie, searching for any sign this was a mistake, that she'd take it back. But her face was stone cold, not a flicker of doubt. 12 years. 12 years of grinding, late nights, finishing reports, missing my son's school plays, taking calls with clients halfway across the globe, all erased in a few sentences. I wanted to shout, demand an explanation, slam the table to make her see how wrong she was, but I didn't. I took a deep breath, clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms, and then I smiled, a cold, polite smile, like I was saying goodbye to a stranger. "Have a good day, Sophie," I said, my voice steady, hiding any tremor. Then I turned and walked out of the meeting room. The glass door clicked shut behind me. Colleagues' eyes followed me as I crossed the open plan office. A few stood up, mouths half open like they wanted to ask, but I shook my head slightly, signaling not to make it harder. I went to my desk, packed my things in silence. The pen holder my son gave me, the framed photo of us at the park, the notebook filled with Transglobal details, all went into a cardboard box. I didn't look at anyone, didn't want to see pity or curiosity in their eyes. Out in the parking lot, I sat in my old SUV, rain tapping on the windshield. I gripped the steering wheel, my breathing heavy, feeling like I'd just run a mile. Anger surged, but not at Sophie. Not yet. I was more curious than angry. Why did she fire me? She acted so confident, so reckless, like she knew nothing about the Transglobal deal. That contract was days from closing. Just one final meeting with Amir Khalid, someone I'd built trust with over dozens of calls. She couldn't be naive enough not to read the contract, could she? Or was this some dumb power play by a new boss? I drove home through wet streets, the rain's rhythm on the windshield matching my still racing pulse. The cardboard box with my office stuff sat quietly on the passenger seat, a reminder of what just happened. 12 years at Evergreen Solutions, late nights working until dawn, holidays missed for reports, calls across time zones with clients, all wiped out by a few words from Sophie Bennett. I gripped the wheel, trying to keep my breathing steady, but inside, I was shaking, not from cold, but from the shock that hadn't faded. My small apartment was dark when I stepped inside, streetlights filtering through the blinds, casting faint streaks on the wooden floor. I set the box on the kitchen table, next to the cold coffee from that morning. I sat down, staring at the framed photo on the table, me and my son at the park, him grinning with his baseball glove. 12 years, I thought. 12 years I gave the company more than my own family. The times I canceled movie nights with my son to handle client crises. The nights I sat in the hospital with my mom, but still answered work emails. I gave them everything, and now I was fired like some useless nobody. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was curious. The question echoed in my head, like a song that wouldn't stop. Why? Why did Sophie fire me now? Days before the final transglobal meeting. That deal was my biggest achievement. $20 million contract I built from scratch, from initial emails with Amir Khalid, Transglobal's CEO, to hours-long meetings. I'd learned a few Arabic phrases to impress him, memorized every contract detail to ensure no mistakes. The final meeting, where it would all be signed, was days away. Sophie couldn't be foolish enough not to know that, could she? I stood up, stepped onto the small balcony, letting Seattle's rain hit my face. The damp air sharpened my senses, but the question wouldn't leave. Sophie's confidence, the way she flipped through papers like firing me, was a chore. Felt off. She acted so reckless, so rushed, like she hadn't read the transglobal contract. I recalled her eyes, not the look of someone in control, but of someone trying to seem powerful. Did she not know I was the only one Amir Khalid trusted to negotiate? Did she not realize that contract was the backbone of this quarter? I went back to the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and checked my emails one last broadly accessible time before my company account was locked. The transglobal meeting was still there, marked in red, just days away. I stared at the text, feeling like it was mocking me. Sophie picked the worst possible time to fire me, and it didn't make sense. She couldn't not know my role in this deal, unless she really didn't read the contract. The thought stopped me cold. A new CEO, the boss's daughter, fresh in power and wanting to flex her authority by cutting someone like me, but without doing her homework. Was that the answer? I closed my eyes, trying to push back the headache creeping in. I wasn't angry, not quite. The curiosity was stronger, like a small flame burning steadily. I needed to know why. I needed to know if Sophie was really foolish enough not to see her mistake. The next morning, I woke up with a dull headache, the result of a nearly sleepless night. The apartment was still dark, Seattle's streetlights filtering through the blinds, casting faint streaks on the wooden floor. Last night's cold coffee sat on the kitchen table, next to the framed photo of my son grinning. The question, what was she thinking, still haunted me, like a melody that wouldn't fade. I stood up, stepped onto the balcony, letting Seattle's damp air ease my tension. I'd spent the night thinking about Sophie Bennett, her reckless confidence, and the transglobal contract. The $20 million deal I'd spent 8 months building. Something wasn't right, and I needed answers. The phone on the kitchen table buzzed, snapping me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen, a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready for another shock, but curiosity won. I picked up. "Ethan, it's James Bennett," the voice on the line said, strong but strained, making my heart skip. James was the boss, the founder of Evergreen Solutions, the one who hired me 12 years ago, after a short interview. "I just got to the office," he said, his voice catching like he was holding back emotion. "Why are you packing up and leaving? What happened?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady, despite the blood rushing to my head. "Your daughter fired me, sir," I said. "Yesterday, Sophie said I was lazy and no longer needed." Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath on the line, like a blade cutting through. "What?" James asked, his voice low, as if he couldn't believe his ears. I repeated myself, word for word, the hurt from yesterday rising again. "She said I was lazy, and I had to leave immediately." Another long silence, like James was trying to process it. Then he spoke, slowly, like he was holding back anger. "Ethan, did she read the transglobal contract?" I frowned, not following. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart beating faster. "She's supposed to close the transglobal deal today, right?" James continued, his voice now tinged with worry. "The meeting with Amir Khalid is scheduled for 11, isn't it?" "Yes," I replied, unease spreading. "I prepared everything for that meeting. I know that contract inside out." "God damn it," James muttered. I heard papers rustling on his end, then a loud thud, like he'd slammed his fist on the desk. "Ethan, there's a clause in that contract," he said, his voice urgent. "A clause I insisted on, after a bad deal with a major client a few years back. You're not just the deal's manager. You're the only authorized negotiator for Transglobal." I froze, my breath catching. "You mean, Sophie can't sign the contract without you?" James went on, his voice now a mix of anger and desperation. "Not legally, not ethically, not even practically. That deal will fall apart if you're not there." A slow burning feeling, like a fire, spread through my chest. Sophie didn't read the contract. She didn't know about the clause. She fired me without checking, without a hint of doubt that she'd just shot herself in the foot. The hurt from yesterday lingered. But now I felt something else. Leverage. Sophie had pulled the trigger too fast, and now the gun was pointed back at her. James stopped talking, but I could feel his anger through the silence on the line. "Ethan," he said, his voice lower. "I need you back. Not just for the deal, but for this company. She was wrong, and I need to fix this." I didn't answer right away. I stood there, looking out at the rain, still gripping the phone. The curiosity from last night now had an answer, but it opened a dozen new questions. Sophie didn't know what she'd done. She didn't know she'd put the whole company at risk, and that made me wonder, how would she react when she found out? I took a deep breath, my voice calm but firm. "I'll consider it, James," I said, "but I want to meet in person to discuss terms." He agreed immediately, his voice tinged with relief. After James Bennett's call, I stood still for a long time in my apartment. Sophie had made a massive mistake firing me without reading the Transglobal contract, and James knew it. He needed me back to save the $20 million deal, but I wasn't returning as an obedient employee. If I went back, it would be on my terms, with clear conditions. I picked up the phone, called James back. "I'll come to the office," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "But I want to meet you alone first. We need to talk terms." James agreed instantly, his voice carrying a hint of relief, like he'd shed a weight. I put on a sharp suit, stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie. Yesterday I left Evergreen Solutions, like a loser, cardboard box in hand. Today I'd return as someone in control. I drove through Seattle's wet streets, rain speckling the windshield, streetlights flickering in the fog. When I reached Evergreen Solutions' glass building, I didn't use the employee side entrance. I walked through the main lobby, my leather shoes echoing on the marble floor, the eyes of the receptionist and colleagues locking onto me. They whispered, some stunned, some flashing discreet smiles. Everyone knew I was fired yesterday. My return was a statement. James was waiting in his office, standing behind his large wooden desk, light from the window, glinting off his silver hair. He didn't smile, just nodded. "Ethan, thank you for coming," he said, his voice low but sincere. I sat down, meeting his eye. "I'll come back to close the Transglobal deal," I said, my voice even. "But I want full control of this deal. No one, not even Sophie, interferes. And I want it in writing in a new contract." James nodded immediately. No hesitation. "Done," he said. "And I'm sorry for yesterday. Sophie's actions were unacceptable." I didn't respond, just gave a slight nod. His apology was genuine, but it didn't erase the sting of 12 years of dedication. Being dismissed by Sophie, I stood, shook his hand, and walked out of his office, feeling like I'd laid the first brick in a new battle. I returned to my old desk, colleagues' eyes still tracking me, but I ignored them. I opened my laptop, reviewed the Transglobal documents, every detail I knew by heart, from legal clauses to Amir Khalil's technical demands. I rehearsed a few Arabic phrases, the greetings I knew would make Amir smile. The Transglobal meeting was scheduled for this afternoon, and I wouldn't let a single mistake slip through. But as I organized my files, Sophie appeared at the office door. She stood there, arms crossed, her eyes icy. "What are you doing back?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. I made it clear, "You're not needed." I looked up, flashing the same faint smile from yesterday. "Ask your father," I said, my voice calm but sharp. Sophie's fists clenched, her face flushing, but she said nothing more. She turned, her heels clicking hard on the floor, and I knew she was seething. Her frustration only sharpened my focus. When meeting time came, I walked into the large conference room where the Transglobal team was waiting. Amir Khalid stood, a warm smile on his face. "As-salamu alaikum, Ethan," he said, and I replied in Arabic, making him chuckle. "You still remember," he said, his tone appreciative. I placed the Arabic translated contract on the table, every page meticulously prepared. The meeting flowed smoothly, like a symphony I'd rehearsed for months. Amir asked sharp questions, but I answered fluidly, guiding everyone through each clause with confidence. 2 hours later, we shook hands, the contract signed, and Amir looked at me with respect. "Evergreen is lucky to have you," he said. As the Transglobal team left, colleagues gave a light round of applause, some flashing proud smiles. I felt a new respect from them, but I didn't let it distract me. Through the glass wall, I saw Sophie standing in the hallway, arms crossed, her eyes burning with anger. She hadn't joined the meeting, but I knew she'd watched everything. Her frustration was plain as day, and I knew she wouldn't let this go. She'd lost this round, but Sophie's ego wouldn't rest. After the meeting, I sat at my desk, light from Evergreen Solutions glass windows spilling onto my notebook, where I'd just jotted a few lines about today's success. The $20 million contract was signed, and Amir Khalid's smile lingered in my mind. But the relief didn't last. Sophie Bennett's angry glare from the hallway kept creeping into my thoughts, like a warning. I knew she wouldn't stop. My success today only made her more bitter, and I sensed a storm coming. I closed the notebook, tucked it in the drawer, and told myself to stay sharp. A few days later, the first sign appeared. I got an email from Amir Khalid, polite but confused. "Ethan, I just received an email from you proposing changes to TransGlobal's payment terms. This doesn't align with our agreement yesterday. Can you clarify?" I frowned, opened my inbox. No such email in my sent folder. I dug deeper, and my heart sank when I found a forged email, sent from my account, with completely false terms. Someone had hacked the system, and I didn't need to guess who was behind it. I reported it to IT immediately, requesting a trace of login activity. While waiting, I opened a financial report I'd submitted last week, and my blood ran cold. The numbers had been altered, making me look careless, even potentially fraudulent. I printed a copy, compared it to the original, on my personal drive, and the differences were stark. This wasn't a system glitch. This was sabotage, deliberate and sophisticated. I pulled my notebook from the drawer, started logging every detail, the time of the email, the false content, the report submission date. I'd learned early in my career that paper was a stronger weapon than emotion in places like this. That same afternoon, Matt Dawson, a close colleague who'd worked with me in customer service, texted to meet at a cafe near the office. I walked in, the smell of roasted coffee, mixing with the sound of Seattle's rain tapping the windows. Matt sat in a corner, a cold latte in front of him, his eyes uneasy. "You won't believe what's happening," he said, his voice low like he feared being overheard. "Sophie just got torn apart by her dad in the boardroom, in front of everyone." I raised an eyebrow, sitting down. "For what?" Matt leaned in. "For you. James knows Sophie fired you without reading the TransGlobal contract." He was livid, pulled out the contract, and asked point blank, "Did you read this clause? The one saying you're the only negotiator." Matt paused, sipping his latte. Sophie tried to deflect, mumbling about new directions and reassessing roles, but James wasn't buying it. He flipped to the exact page with the clause, pointed at it, and Sophie went pale. She knew she was. Why TransGlobal almost tanked. I exhaled slowly, feeling my suspicions confirmed. "What else did James say?" I asked. Matt shrugged. "He said if the deal had failed, Sophie's position would need review." Everyone in the room saw it. She stormed out like a demon. Matt looked at me, his eyes tinged with worry. "Ethan, she's blaming you. Says you're stirring trouble, making her look bad. Watch your back." I nodded. But inside, the pressure started to build. I thanked Matt, left the cafe, and walked through Seattle's rain, my mind spinning. Sophie wasn't just bitter about my return. She wanted to ruin me, to make me look incompetent to justify her mistake. The forged email, the altered report, it was all part of her plan. I suspected her assistant, Claire Evans, who always quietly followed Sophie's orders. But I had no solid proof. Not yet. Back at the office, I checked the email system, saving every relevant message to my personal drive. I added to my notebook timelines, Claire's name, and times Sophie lingered near my desk. The pressure kept me awake, my mind taut like a wire. I knew Sophie was playing a dangerous game, but she didn't know I'd faced tricks like this before. 12 years at Evergreen didn't just teach me how to negotiate with clients. It taught me how to survive office warfare. After days of meticulously documenting every trace of Sophie Bennett's sabotage, I felt like I was walking a tightrope. My notebook was now thick with details. Timestamps of forged emails, sent from my account, altered numbers in financial reports, and moments when Claire Evans, Sophie's assistant, lingered near the shared computer in the break room. But I knew paper evidence wasn't enough. I needed the company's systems to confirm it, and I needed James Bennett to act. Luckily, he didn't keep me waiting long. One morning, as I arrived at Evergreen Solutions, Seattle's rain still misting the glass windows, the intercom on my desk buzzed. "Ethan, it's David Larson," a steady voice said. "We need you in the audit room now. There are some irregularities to discuss." My heart raced, but I kept my voice calm. "I'll be right there," I said, grabbing my notebook from the drawer, feeling like I was holding a weapon. The audit room was a makeshift space converted from storage. stacked with files and computers. David Larson, the head auditor, stood by a table, the glow of a monitor lighting his stern face. Two other staff members scrolled through data files on screens. A whiteboard was covered in timelines and technical notes. "Ethan, thanks for coming," David said, gesturing for me to sit. "We're investigating some recent irregularities, and your name came up in a few incidents." I nodded, my heart pounding, but my face composed. "What kind of irregularities?" I asked, though I had a good guess. David pulled up a file on the screen. "First, this email supposedly from your account sent to Transglobal with false information. We confirmed it was sent from the shared computer near the break room. Someone manually entered your login details." He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "Not phishing. This was internal." I gripped my notebook, feeling blood rush to my head. "I reported that as soon as I got Amir Khalid's response," I said, my voice even. "I didn't send that email." David nodded, like he'd expected that. "We know," he said, pulling up another file. "We also found altered emails, modified spreadsheets, and deleted signatures, all tied to your account. But the trail leads to the shared machine. And there's a pattern involving Claire Evans' account, Sophie Bennett's assistant." I sat up straighter, my heart racing. "Claire," I repeated, my voice low. "She works directly for Sophie." David hesitated, then spoke carefully. "We're not concluding yet, but there's a clear pattern. Sabotage aimed at discrediting you. Possibly others." He looked at me. "Do you have any evidence to share?" I opened my notebook, placed it on the table, and flipped through pages of detailed notes. Times, incidents, and Claire's unusual appearances. "I've logged everything," I said, sliding the notebook toward David. "Forged emails, altered reports, and times Sophie tried to publicly undermine me. This isn't random." David scanned the pages, his eyes sharp, then nodded. "Thank you, Ethan. This is very helpful. James asked us to report directly to him. He wants the truth, no cover-ups." He paused, looking at me. "You're not required to attend the reporting session. But if you want, I'll be there." I cut in, my voice firm. "If this is coming to light, I want to look everyone in the eye." David didn't argue, just nodded. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with images of Sophie standing in the hallway, her angry glare after the Transglobal meeting. She thought she could ruin me with dirty tricks, but she didn't know I was ready. I stood on my apartment balcony, watching Seattle's lights flicker through the rain, feeling like a soldier before a battle. The reporting session took place in the large boardroom, the air heavy, like Seattle's sky before a storm. James sat at the head of the table, his face stern. David and the audit team entered first, carrying laptops and files. I sat in a corner, notebook in hand, heart pounding, but mind clear. Sophie arrived late, striding in with forced confidence, phone in hand. No sign of worry, until she saw me. She froze at the door. "He's not on the audit committee," she said, her voice icy, looking at James. James didn't turn. "He's here at my request," he said, his voice cold as steel. Sophie shifted her weight, clearly rattled, but sat down. "This is internal, confidential." She tried again, her voice less certain. "Then you should have kept it confidential when you used company resources to forge emails," I said, my voice calm, but cutting. Sophie let out a forced laugh. "That's absurd." David stood, opening his laptop. "We found multiple logins from Claire Evans' account, all tied to irregularities, targeting Ethan's work," he said, projecting a timeline on the screen. "Forged emails, altered documents, deleted signatures, all with clear traces." He looked at Sophie. "Do you have anything to say?" Sophie opened her mouth, but her words faltered. She glanced at James, then at me, her eyes now tinged with panic. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Ethan's bitter about being fired. He's trying to get back at me." I locked eyes with her, unflinching. "You fired me without reading the Transglobal contract." "Sophie," I said, my voice low but sharp, "you almost destroyed the company's biggest deal in 5 years." James turned, his eyes like knives. "Enough," he said, his voice low but final, carrying the weight of authority and disappointment. Sophie paled, her lips pressed tight, like she was bracing against a tidal wave rising in the room. David continued calmly, each piece of evidence landing like a hammer on her crumbling foundation. James said nothing more, but his eyes said it all, a deep disappointment, and a decision forming in silence. When the reporting session ended, I returned to my office, my mind still echoing with the sound of the truth laid bare. Rain pattered on the glass windows, misting the gray Puget Sound. On my desk, my notebook was thick with documented evidence. Proof that David Larson had exposed Sophie Bennett's sabotage undeniably, forged emails, altered reports, and Claire Evans' unmistakable traces. But I knew, and James knew, this wasn't over. This story didn't end with the truth revealed. For someone like James Bennett, what came next wasn't silence. It was action. And I started preparing for the consequences about to unfold. An internal email arrived the next morning, summoning me and the senior leadership to the boardroom. I suited up, adjusted my tie, feeling like I was entering the final round of a long fight. When I reached the large boardroom, light from the windows spilled across the long wooden table. James seated at the head, his face stern, his silver hair catching the light. David Larson stood by a screen, audit files ready. The other leaders sat in silence, the air so tense you could hear the rain hitting the glass. Sophie entered last, her heels clicking, but the fake confidence from the day before was gone. She sat, avoiding my eyes, clutching her phone like a lifeline. James didn't wait. "We're here to review the audit report," he said, his voice low but sharp as steel. "David, begin." David opened his laptop, projecting the timeline on the screen. Each piece of evidence clear as daylight. "We've verified multiple unauthorized logins from Claire Evans' account, Sophie Bennett's assistant," he said, his voice calm but firm. "These actions include sending forged emails from Ethan Harper's account to TransGlobal, altering financial reports to make him appear negligent, and deleting signatures on critical documents. All were designed to undermine his work." The screen shifted to a list of timestamps, each line a blow to Sophie. David pointed to a system log file. "Technical traces show these actions originated from the shared computer near the break room, often when Claire was present. We also have Claire's testimony, confirming she acted under Sophie's direct instructions." The room was silent. Sophie shot up, her face flushed. "This is fabricated," she shouted, her voice shaking. "Ethan's retaliating for being fired. He's been trying to humiliate me since he came back. He's been trying to humiliate me since he came back." I locked eyes with her, unflinching. "You fired me without reading the TransGlobal contract, Sophie," I said, my voice low but cutting. "You almost tanked the company's biggest deal, and when I saved it, you tried to sabotage me to cover your mistake." Sophie opened her mouth, but James raised a hand, cutting her off. "Enough," he said, his voice like ice. He turned to David. "What's your conclusion?" David didn't hesitate. "Sophie Bennett's actions were not only unethical but posed a serious risk to the company," he said. "We recommend immediate suspension and consideration for termination." James nodded slowly, his eyes shifting to Sophie. "Sophie," he said, his voice low but heavy with disappointment. "You've crossed a line. This behavior is unforgivable. You're fired, effective immediately." Sophie paled, her lips trembling. "Dad," she shouted, but James didn't look at her. She stood there, her eyes a mix of fury and panic, then turned, her heels clicking hard as she stormed out. The glass door slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing in the silence. I watched her go, not gloating, just feeling a heavy relief. Sophie had dug her own grave, and she'd just fallen in. James turned to me, his eyes softening. "Ethan," he said, his voice sincere. "I'm sorry. For everything she did. For the disrespect to your 12 years of dedication. This company owes you. Especially for TransGlobal." He paused, looking around the room. "I want you back, as Director of Customer Strategy, reporting directly to me. And I want it in writing in a new contract, with all the authority you need." The other leaders nodded, some offering faint smiles. I took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift. "I'm in," I said, my voice firm. "But I want the contract clear with no interference from anyone." James nodded. "Done." He shook my hand, and for the first time that week, I felt a sliver of peace. As I left the boardroom, colleagues' eyes followed, no longer with pity or curiosity but with respect. I walked through the main lobby, feeling like I'd reclaimed what was stolen. When the final bell of the board meeting rang, and Sophie Bennett left Evergreen Solutions with a mix of fury and panic in her eyes, the office fell into an odd silence, like Seattle's sky after a storm. I sat in my new office, looking out at Puget Sound through the glass, where rain still fell lightly. The nameplate on my desk was blank, waiting to be engraved, but the Director of Customer Strategy role was mine. The new contract, signed right after the meeting, sat in my drawer, spelling out the autonomy I'd demanded. 12 years of dedication, one betrayal, and a brutal fight. I'd taken back what was mine. But this victory didn't make me smug. It made me reflect. I started restructuring the customer service department the next week. The office vibe had shifted. No more cautious glances or whispers behind backs. I opened communication channels, held team meetings to hear ideas, and reinstated a few employees pushed out in Sophie's impulsive purge. I set up an anonymous reporting system, ensuring no one feared retaliation for speaking truth. Colleagues, from those who'd stayed silent to ones I'd trained from day one, started sending congratulatory emails. One wrote, "You saved us, not just the deal." I read it, smiled, but didn't let it distract me. The real work was just starting. The Transglobal deal hit industry magazines, praised as a turning point for Evergreen Solutions, though my name wasn't mentioned. I didn't care. I'd done what I needed to. Not for applause, but to prove my worth. One afternoon, as I reviewed reports, Matt Dawson walked into my office, holding 2 coffees from the nearby shop. "For you," he said, setting one on my desk. "Heard Sophie's in deep trouble." I raised an eyebrow, taking the coffee. "What kind of trouble?" Matt sat down, shrugging. "She tried applying at a rival firm, but word about what happened here got out. No one wants to touch a CEO fired for internal sabotage." He sipped his coffee, looking at me. "James probably kept the scandal off the press, but the industry knows. She's done." I nodded, saying nothing. I wasn't surprised, nor did I gloat. Sophie chose her path, and now she was paying for it. But I didn't want to waste time thinking about her. I had bigger things to do. Rebuilding the department, restoring trust, and ensuring no one else repeated her mistakes. I stood up, stepped onto the office balcony, looking out at Seattle's skyline. The rain kept falling, but the city's lights twinkled like stars through the mist. I thought about this journey, from that moment by the coffee machine, when Sophie erased my 12 years of work, sleepless nights logging evidence, to the moment she left the boardroom in defeat. I'd fought, not to crush Sophie, but to hold on to my self-respect. That was the real victory. I thought of my son, waiting at home, probably practicing his baseball throws in the backyard. I'd promised to take him to a game, and this time I'd keep that promise. I wanted him to know that no matter how harsh life gets, your worth isn't what others think. It's how you stand up after a fall. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and started drafting an email to the team. "We'll work with transparency, respect, and unity," I wrote, my fingers moving fast. This is a new start for Evergreen Solutions. I sent the email, closed the laptop, and stood up. As I walked through the main lobby, colleagues' eyes no longer held curiosity or pity. They looked at me like a leader. I smiled, stepped into the elevator, ready for the future. The story of Ethan Harper's journey, and my boss's daughter fired me the moment she took over the company. She didn't know she would lose everything. Reflects many real-world aspects of life in the United States today, especially in competitive workplaces and high-pressure office cultures. From Ethan's sudden firing by Sophie at Evergreen Solutions in Seattle, to his persistent evidence gathering, facing sabotage, and ultimate vindication, the story captures challenges many American workers face: injustice, abuse of power, and the pressure to prove one's worth in a performance-driven society. The Seattle setting, a hub of tech and innovation, evokes the reality of the logistics software industry, where precision and reputation are critical, as seen when Ethan saved the $20 million Transglobal deal with his expertise and relationship with Amir Khalid. Sophie's arrogance, as a young leader lacking experience, mirrors a trend in the U.S., where newly promoted individuals sometimes overlook veteran employees' value. Her sabotage through forged emails and altered documents reflects unhealthy competition in modern workplaces, where technology can be misused. The lesson from this story is that persistence and integrity can overcome injustice, but they require strategy and preparation. Ethan didn't let emotions take over. Instead, he documented evidence and built alliances with Matt and David, showing skill in navigating U.S. office politics, where records and data often determine justice. In real-life America, when facing unfair treatment, like wrongful termination or sabotage, you should stay calm like Ethan, keep evidence, emails, notes, and seek support from trusted colleagues. Moreover, Ethan's focus on self-worth over gloating at Sophie's downfall reminds us that true success in the U.S. isn't about defeating others, but standing tall through challenges and rebuilding with integrity. as Ethan did by restructuring his department with an anonymous reporting system. Learn from Ethan in a competitive society. Self-respect and preparation are the keys to weathering storms. Subscribe to the channel to follow journeys of overcoming injustice and reclaiming self-worth like Ethan Harper. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video with more inspiring stories from Evergreen Solutions.